Waking up with a bitter groan, the famously ill-tempered antagonist complains about the overwhelming hassle of his current existence. Embodying pure arrogance and sloth, this so-called genius scumbag realizes he has never put an ounce of effort into his life. Staring forward in stunned silence, the terrifying gravity of his deplorable physical state suddenly washes over him. Paralyzed by a sudden epiphany, he realizes that continuing down this path will undoubtedly guarantee his absolute destruction. Horrified by his grotesque reflection, the orphaned noble realizes his warped upbringing has left him disastrously overweight. A chilling premonition strikes him, cementing the undeniable fact that Albin will surely face total, unavoidable ruin. Recalling the tragic plot of the novel, Albin remembers that a humiliating duel with the protagonist triggers his ultimate downfall at the academy. Determined to avoid dying pathetically on the streets, he resolves to drastically change his lifestyle just as a sudden knock interrupts his thoughts. Recognizing the familiar presence at his door, Albin swiftly identifies the newcomer as his loyal servant, Seabass. Stepping into the room with respectful composure, Seabass humbly announces his arrival to Master Albin. Stumbling back in sheer disbelief, the servant gasps in shock at the unbelievable sight before him. Staring at Seabass Christian, the true pillar of the household, Albin notes that a servant had made a foolish blunder earlier. Seabass bursts into tears of shock, utterly bewildered that the notoriously lazy Albin is actually dressing himself. Dismissing the old man's emotional outburst over a basic task, Albin sharply calls out to Seabass to discuss a critical matter. While Albin points out the sheer efficiency of dressing himself, Seabass weeps openly, deeply moved by his master's unprecedented independence. Regaining a sliver of composure, the loyal butler attentively asks what his suddenly proactive master requires. Seabass stands completely paralyzed by shock as Albin boldly demands to be trained in the rigorous art of swordsmanship. Dropping another bombshell on his dumbfounded servant, Albin casually declares his desperate intention to lose weight. Frantically searching for an excuse to convince Seabass, Albin knows internally that failing to change now guarantees a doomed future. A brilliant spark of inspiration hits Albin as he finally devises the perfect lie to manipulate his overly dramatic butler. Panicking wildly, Seabass assumes Albin has suffered a severe head injury, forcing the boy to aggressively defend his sudden burst of sanity. Playing on the old man's sympathies, Albin grimly declares that his current pathetic state will absolutely prevent him from ever finding a wife. The mere mention of a potential marriage completely blindsides Seabass, shifting the old servant's chaotic emotions once again. Locking eyes with lethal seriousness, Albin orders Seabass to abandon all mercy and train him with murderous intensity. Overwhelmed by the boy's newfound burning resolve, Seabass whispers his master's name in sheer, trembling awe. Crushing Seabass's polite reassurances about his aristocratic standing, Albin furiously barks that his absolute mind is made up. A heavy, electrifying silence fills the room as the veteran butler gazes into the unyielding, transformed eyes of his young master. Thoroughly convinced by the undeniable fire in the boy's gaze, Seabass internally marvels at Albin's impossibly firm resolve. Bowing with ultimate respect and newfound purpose, Seabass officially accepts the monumental task of forging Albin into a warrior. The absolute pact is sealed, binding them to a brutal, uncompromising regimen of both extreme dieting and sword mastery. Pumping himself up with explosive enthusiasm, Albin immediately complains about the inevitable hassle of the hellish training ahead. Swearing an unbreakable oath of loyalty, Seabass Christian vows to dedicate every ounce of his strength to his master's rebirth. Exactly 1 week later, the brutal reality of their hellish training leaves a drenched, exhausted Albin gasping wildly for air. Standing over the broken boy like an immovable titan, Seabass strictly commands Albin to push through the pain and forge his fundamentals. Screaming in absolute agony as his muscles tear and shake, Albin endures Seabass's ruthless taunts about giving up so soon. A tense silence blankets the scene as the agonizing training session dramatically commences. Screaming in pure agony, Albin fiercely protests that he already knows his absolute limits. Seabass mercilessly instructs him to train his muscles evenly, prompting Albin to call him an absolute demon. Collapsing completely, Albin gasps that every breath tears his muscles apart and his exhausted body refuses to move. Panting heavily, Albin lies drained on the ground as the grueling workout completely saps his strength. Reflecting on his overwhelmingly negative starting point, Albin rationalizes that he can still afford to take things slowly. A shocking revelation shatters Albin's hopes as he hysterically repeats the dreaded timeframe of 3 grueling years. Seabass calmly estimates that at this current pace, Albin will successfully slim down in 1 to 3 years. Groaning at the immense hassle, Albin internally concedes that even this agonizing progress is far superior to his past. Stumbling forward weakly, Albin desperately begs his relentless butler to stay with him just a little longer. Praising his master's fiery spirit, Seabass promises with absolute loyalty to accompany Albin wherever he goes. 1 month later, Albin executes a decent blade trajectory, though Seabass easily parries and mocks his painfully slow speed. 2 months later, Seabass abruptly lunges with fierce intensity, aggressively warning his master never to let his guard down. 3 months later, Albin excitedly claims he caught up, only for a delighted Seabass to block his strike instantly. Stepping into a dark, cavernous space, Albin marvels aloud at the unexpected, hidden existence of a sprawling dungeon. Walking deeper into the cavern, Seabass explains that this specific dungeon area only spawns comparatively weak monsters. Analyzing his master's astonishing progress, Seabass notes that Albin has achieved a commendable level of proficiency over 3 months. Footsteps echo ominously through the rocky tunnels as the master and servant advance further into the perilous depths. Drawing his weapon, Seabass solemnly declares his intention to see if Albin's refined sword holds up in actual combat. Staring into the dark abyss, Albin tightly grips his weapon, realizing the terrifying truth that this is his final test. Pointing toward the shadows, Seabass directs Albin's attention to a hideous, low-class monster known as a goblin. Challenging his master's resolve, Seabass turns and directly asks Albin if he possesses the required strength to cut it down. Swallowing his rising fear, Albin gives a firm, silent nod of absolute, unwavering determination. Observing the lone goblin, Seabass calmly deduces that the foul creature must have foolishly strayed from its usual pack. The hideous goblin screeches aggressively, instantly locking its murderous, wild gaze onto the 2 invading humans. Gripping his sword with explosive energy, Albin charges furiously toward the menacing, bloodthirsty monster. Watching the boy sprint forward, Seabass silently admits he initially expected the fragile Albin to quit within 3 mere days. Albin rapidly closes the distance, his sharp blade gleaming in the dim light as he perfectly positions himself to strike. Seabass reflects on his past doubts, vividly recalling his absolute certainty that the lazy brat would never endure the training. Slashing downward with incredible speed, Albin showcases his abnormal ability to absorb and master every brutal lesson. Witnessing the flawless execution, Seabass realizes with awe that a genius who actually makes an effort possesses absolutely no limits. The goblin shrieks in sheer terror as Albin's masterful, overpowering strike completely dominates the underground battlefield. Blood violently splatters across the dungeon floor as Albin expertly cleaves the horrific monster in a single, devastating blow. Standing victorious over his vanquished foe, Albin perfectly proves his undeniable, staggering growth as a true warrior. Smiling with genuine thrill, Seabass firmly acknowledges Albin's power, wondering when his heart last leapt with such immense excitement. The title "Beloved by God" flashes as the narrative dramatically shifts into a new, explosive chapter. A fierce, unseen energy crackles through the tense atmosphere of the dark, underground cavern. With a sharp, resounding click, Albin flawlessly sheathes his bloodied weapon after securing the brutal kill. Clapping slowly with genuine respect, Seabass offers glowing praise for his master's incredibly splendid execution. The veteran butler coldly commends Albin's terrifyingly merciless and ruthlessly efficient swordsmanship. A profound, silent realization dawns as Albin officially awakens as a true, formidable swordsman. Smiling with absolute pride, Seabass firmly declares that he has absolutely nothing left to teach his vastly improved master. An overwhelming surge of physical exhaustion and triumphant accomplishment intensely washes over the young warrior. Time accelerates swiftly as the brutal, relentless days of hellish training finally forge a brand new reality. Exactly 6 months later, a panicked Albin aggressively confronts Seabass about a sudden, shocking marriage proposal. Bursting with frantic, chaotic energy, Albin completely shatters the peaceful silence as he loudly questions the insane news. Calmly enduring the wild outburst, Seabass cryptically warns that the proposal might not actually be considered good news. Trembling with anxious excitement, the drastically slimmed-down Albin desperately hopes his future bride is genuinely cute and kind. Clearing his throat to regain control, Albin urgently demands to know exactly which noble house proposed this sudden union. Seabass solemnly reveals that the astonishing, monumental proposal comes directly from the prestigious house of Duke Barrow. Gasping in utter disbelief, Albin aggressively questions why a vastly superior duke would ever approach a lowly baron's family. A horrifying, buried memory from the original novel suddenly strikes Albin like a devastating lightning bolt. He realizes with absolute dread that his proposed bride is Letitia Barrow, a notorious troublemaker dumped for her endless misdeeds. Falling into deep despair, Albin cries that his 6 months of agonizing effort are completely wasted as he hurtles toward ruin. Clutching his head in pure frustration, Albin furiously screams about the overwhelming, apocalyptic hassle of his doomed fate. Unfazed by the dramatic breakdown, Seabass casually notes the lady's difficult personality and brutally tells Albin to do his best. Desperate to escape immediate doom, Albin rapidly fires off frantic requests to completely reject the highly troublesome marriage proposal. A heavy, suffocatingly tense silence violently crashes down between the desperately panicked master and his stoic butler. Maintaining his flawless composure, Seabass politely urges his terrified young master not to become so quickly and pathetically disheartened. Seabass viciously shuts down the escape plan by warning Albin of the catastrophic consequences of angering the Marquis Barrow. The butler coldly explains that forming a powerful connection with the Barrow family will permanently secure the Ordran household's future. Sobbing uncontrollably in stark terror, Albin hysterically counters that this exact, cursed connection is exactly what will destroy him. Shaking with intense morbid curiosity, Albin nervously demands to know the exact, horrifying details of Letitia's atrocious rumors. Seabass bluntly reveals that the dangerous lady is an outrageous spendthrift who criminally seized her former fiancé's assets. Further crushing Albin's hopes, Seabass violently details how she blatantly embezzled territory taxes and smuggled young men into her mansion. A paralyzing, icy wave of sheer terror instantly freezes Albin as the catastrophic reality of his nightmarish bride fully sets in. The terrifying, shadowy image of the notoriously wicked Letitia Barrow violently burns itself into Albin's overwhelmingly panicked mind. Weeping tears of profound defeat, Albin fiercely wails that his excruciating diet and fierce determination were entirely meaningless. A heavy, wildly ominous tension thickens the mansion's air as the dreaded moment of truth rapidly and unstoppably approaches. Standing rigidly before the massive wooden doors, Albin grimly resigns himself to his fate as the chaotic meeting finally commences. Bracing for absolute disaster, an incredibly nervous Albin intensely wonders what kind of deeply dangerous person is about to step out. The heavy wooden door of the grand carriage dramatically swings open, revealing a tense and heavily anticipated arrival. To his complete shock, a breathtakingly beautiful girl emerges, politely greeting them with an aura entirely different from his chaotic expectations. Bowing with flawless grace, the radiant girl officially introduces herself as Letitia Barrow, formally placing herself in the Ordran family's care. Utterly paralyzed by her unexpected elegance, a deeply stunned Albin can only stare in silent, blushing awe. Shaking off his sheer disbelief, Albin awkwardly stammers a confusing question regarding the sudden absence of her personal maid. Stepping forward with perfect composure, Seabass politely introduces himself as the butler and kindly offers to swiftly escort her to her room. Ignoring Albin's fumbling words, a fiercely blunt Letitia commands the loyal butler to show her the way immediately. Turning with an icy, independent glare, Letitia bluntly drops the massive bombshell that she somehow traveled here completely alone. While a flustered Albin desperately clarifies his completely misunderstood question, Seabass humbly apologizes and silently notes the lady's overwhelming beauty. Pausing thoughtfully in the quiet hallway, the veteran butler carefully attempts to summarize his initial impression in a single, precise word. Turning with burning curiosity, Albin eagerly asks Seabass for his completely unfiltered, honest opinion regarding their new, enigmatic guest. Maintaining his stoic demeanor, Seabass calmly and simply describes the wildly unpredictable Letitia as profoundly peculiar. Frowning deeply, Albin fiercely points out that her refined, graceful bearing absolutely does not resemble that of a wildly vicious troublemaker. Narrowing his eyes with sharp suspicion, Albin confidently deduces that a massive, hidden secret surely lurks behind the girl's terrible rumors. Nodding in complete agreement, Seabass admits he genuinely sensed a profound, piercing intelligence hiding beneath her calm exterior. Staring into the dimly lit corridor, Albin grimly realizes this entire marriage situation feels overwhelmingly complicated and dangerously deep. Determined to uncover the absolute truth, Albin strictly orders Seabass to discreetly investigate Letitia's mysterious past without raising any suspicion. Seabass calmly asks for immediate clarification, while Albin openly expresses a massive wave of sheer relief regarding her actual personality. Refusing to get violently dragged into the Barrow family's dark troubles, Albin vows to personally extract the required information directly from her. Seabass happily praises Lady Letitia's undeniable elegance, boldly admitting he genuinely expected an uncultured brute completely incapable of basic conversation. Gazing thoughtfully into the distance, the seasoned butler silently ponders the wildly unexpected nature of this incredibly strange marital arrangement. Staring forward with a mix of anxiety and hope, Albin sincerely admits he would be profoundly glad if Seabass's positive assessment proves entirely true. Smiling warmly, Seabass confidently suggests that this highly misunderstood lady might actually prove to be a perfectly worthy wife for Lord Albin. Later during a lavish dinner, a heavily annoyed Albin loudly complains about being entirely ignored while desperately trying to entertain his silent bride. Waving his hands dramatically, Albin frantically attempts to break the icy silence by energetically recounting a wild, thrilling tale about a reckless adventurer. Completely unfazed by his chaotic storytelling, a silent Letitia continues elegantly eating her meal without offering a single reaction. Setting her utensils down gracefully, Letitia softly thanks them for the delicious meal before coldly standing up to immediately leave. When Seabass bluntly claims she simply found the joke terribly dull, a deeply frustrated Albin fiercely orders his cheeky butler to shut up. Sighing heavily over her icy treatment, Albin rationally admits he perfectly understands her deep hesitation given his historically terrible, ruined reputation. Clenching his fists with explosive determination, Albin fiercely vows that he absolutely cannot just back down from this incredibly difficult challenge. After enduring 3 full days of absolute, crushing silence, a worried Albin seriously wonders if Letitia is keeping her guard heavily raised against him. Spotting her in the hallway, an overly eager Albin loudly and cheerfully invites his distant bride to join him for a pleasant, relaxing walk. Before the desperate boy can even finish his sentence, Letitia swiftly turns and briskly walks away in the exact opposite direction. Chasing frantically after her retreating figure, Albin desperately fires off random, chaotic questions about her personal preference between medicinal herbs and potions. The title-crushing defeat crashes onto the scene as the tense narrative aggressively continues. Sighing with heavy frustration, Albin desperately begs his fiercely silent bride to just talk to him. Flashing a look of absolute determination, Albin violently decides to change his entire approach. Realizing the absolute necessity of breaking the ice, Albin resolves to forcefully uncover whatever dark secrets she carries inside. Striding purposefully up to her imposing wooden door, Albin loudly requests a brief moment of her time. A heavy, suffocating silence stretches endlessly as the stubborn girl completely refuses to answer his call. Clenching his fists in sheer annoyance, Albin bitterly mutters that she is completely ignoring him just as expected. Unleashing a devastating, explosive kick, Albin ruthlessly shatters the heavy wooden door straight off its iron hinges. Stepping through the splintered wreckage with a dark smirk, Albin boldly declares that he will happily play the role of the scum villain. Looming over the profoundly shocked Letitia, Albin aggressively commands her to step outside for the sake of her fragile health. Utterly paralyzed by his sudden, violent intrusion, Letitia stares up at him with wide, trembling eyes. Radiating absolute confidence, Albin smoothly extends his hand to violently pull her out of her gloomy isolation. Gazing down at his outstretched hand, the bewildered noblewoman hesitates in the face of his overwhelming, chaotic energy. Suddenly breaking the heavy tension, the stoic butler Seabass casually interrupts the intense, dramatic standoff. Snapping violently out of her frozen daze, Letitia furiously demands to know what on earth Albin thinks he is doing. Completely ignoring her fierce outrage, Seabass calmly promises to repair the shattered door while Letitia violently screams that the door is not the real issue. Moving with blinding speed, Albin forcefully grabs her delicate hand, eliciting a sharp gasp of pure shock from the terrified girl. Struggling wildly against his iron grip, Letitia fiercely questions his absolute lack of shame for recklessly barging into a lady's private room. Staring down with an unwavering, predatory gaze, Albin firmly confirms that he will do absolutely anything to achieve his ultimate objective. Embracing his dark reputation with a fearless smirk, Albin ruthlessly reminds her that a scummy villain holds absolutely no regard for polite boundaries. Leaning in with overwhelming, unstoppable charisma, Albin boldly demands that Letitia accompany him on a forced date. A deep, explosive blush violently paints Letitia's face as the sheer audacity of his romantic demand completely shatters her icy composure. Completely short-circuiting from the sudden emotional whiplash, the flustered noblewoman can only let out a weak, bewildered gasp. Marching triumphantly through the vibrant wilderness, Albin loudly celebrates the crisp, refreshing taste of the great outdoors. Pouting with icy resistance, Letitia bitterly mutters that the beautiful scenery would be vastly improved if Albin were completely absent. Mentally reviewing his abysmal reputation, Albin casually accepts that she still treats him like complete, absolute trash. Stumbling clumsily over the rough terrain, Letitia fiercely struggles to maintain her elegant balance in her completely impractical footwear. Observing her fierce struggle, Albin silently admits that he would never trust a notorious scumbag like Albin Ordrin either. Pointing dramatically toward the soaring peaks, Albin enthusiastically promises a breathtaking, unparalleled view just beyond the rugged mountain path. Losing her footing entirely, a panicked Letitia wildly cries out for him to wait as she violently trips over the treacherous rocks. As Letitia frantically begins to lecture him on proper mountain attire, Albin swiftly interrupts by smoothly stepping directly into her personal space. Flashing a charming, fearless grin, Albin forcefully scoops the stunned girl right off her trembling feet. A piercing shriek of sheer terror and embarrassment violently erupts from Letitia as Albin effortlessly lifts her into a sudden Princess Carrie. Staring deeply into her incredibly flushed face, Albin smoothly justifies his bold move by claiming it guarantees her absolute safety. Completely overpowered by his aggressive charm, a heavily blushing Letitia averts her gaze in flustered, undeniable defeat. Letitia nervously squirms in his firm grip, quietly protesting the highly embarrassing situation and strictly warning Albin not to try anything weird. Squishing her gently, Albin casually deflects her deep suspicions while silently praising Seabass's brutal training for granting him the incredible strength to effortlessly carry his bride. Reflecting on his massive physical transformation, Albin internally marvels at how smoothly he can lift his incredibly flustered wife without breaking a single sweat. Suddenly breaking the heavy tension, Albin enthusiastically points forward and tells Letitia to look as their glorious, hidden destination finally comes into clear view. A breathtaking panorama of vibrant, sunlit mountains violently unfolds before them, leaving Letitia completely awestruck and totally speechless. Turning slightly with a soft gasp, Letitia gazes at Albin in genuine wonder as a gentle, refreshing breeze sweeps across the magnificent highland cliff. Meeting her astonished gaze with a deeply genuine smile, Albin proudly declares that he desperately wanted to show her this perfect overlook of the entire Ordran territory. Pointing grandly toward the sprawling, beautiful lands below, Albin sincerely explains that this is the precious realm they will fiercely protect together. Staring deeply into his bright, unwavering eyes, Letitia feels a sudden, intense flutter in her chest at his remarkably earnest and noble words. Breaking eye contact with a soft, embarrassed sigh, Letitia hastily attempts to mask her rapidly rising blush by stubbornly turning away. Peeking back at him through her lashes, she bluntly admits that the dark rumors painted Albin Ordran as a deeply arrogant, impertinent, and entirely small-time villain. Relaxing her heavily guarded posture, Letitia offers a small, breathtakingly genuine smile as she notes how drastically different he is from those terrible rumors. Wagging his finger with a playful smirk, Albin happily corrects her by adding lazy to his massive list of former faults while fiercely denying his status as a small-time crook. Chuckling with dark, highly theatrical amusement, Albin confidently leans forward to forcefully assert his true, overwhelming dominance. Striking an incredibly dramatic pose, he proudly declares himself a magnificent big-time villain instead, completely embracing his terrible reputation for comedic effect. Giggling softly at his completely ridiculous antics, Letitia smoothly points out that real, dangerous villains usually do not run around cheerfully announcing their own villainy. Captivated entirely by her sudden, radiant laughter, Albin stares in absolute awe at the breathtakingly beautiful smile finally gracing her face. Splashing playfully in a crystal-clear mountain stream, Albin teasingly asks if this raw, vibrant nature is an entirely novel experience for a sheltered city girl. Stomping joyfully into the refreshing water, Albin gleefully shouts about how incredibly cold and absolutely amazing the roaring mountain stream feels. Brushing off her sarcastic comment about him eagerly scoring points against a city girl, Albin casually laughs and admits he was just joking around. Seizing the wonderfully relaxed atmosphere, Albin eagerly suggests they take this perfect, rare opportunity to finally learn some real facts about each other. Splashing out of the water with bright, explosive enthusiasm, Albin gently calls out Letitia's name to officially initiate their long-overdue conversation. Smiling warmly at his distant bride, Albin proposes a simple, highly honest self-introduction to finally bridge the massive, awkward gap between them. Caught completely off guard by his genuinely pure interest, Letitia stares at him in wide-eyed, heavily blushing surprise. Regaining her flawless, elegant composure, Letitia formally introduces herself, revealing her deep love for tea, warm scones, and happily playing with children. Surprised by her incredibly wholesome affection for kids, Albin enthusiastically praises her wonderful hobbies before instantly preparing his own energetic introduction. Striking a confident, heroic stance, Albin introduces himself as a reformed lazy aristocrat who absolutely loves sword practice but is currently sacrificing his favorite steak for a brutal diet. Absorbing his highly energetic and honest introduction, Letitia gazes at him thoughtfully, quietly processing the stark contrast between his ruined past and vibrant present self. Smiling with genuine, profound amusement, Letitia softly remarks that Albin is an incredibly strange person who completely blurs the line between dangerously diligent and utterly lazy. Agreeing with her sharp assessment while happily embracing his flaws, Albin warmly confesses that he genuinely likes Letitia exactly the way she is right now. Acknowledging that his intense diligence successfully forged his impressive new physique, Letitia thoughtfully considers actively following his highly inspiring example. A terrifying, blood-curdling roar violently shatters the peaceful moment as a massive, heavily scarred killer bear erupts directly from the dense forest behind them. Completely unfazed by the towering, monstrous beast, Albin casually notes that these specific, violent bears have been causing major trouble for the local crops. Shocked by his total, insane lack of panic, Letitia frantically screams at him for acting so casually while the monstrous bear aggressively prepares to strike. Drawing his shining blade with a fearless, predatory grin, Albin calmly acknowledges the monstrous bear's ravenous hunger right before preparing to ruthlessly slaughter it. Lunging forward with terrifying speed, the monstrous beast locks its murderous gaze directly onto the defenseless Letitia. Slashing through the air with lethal precision, Albin violently repels the creature while roaring at it to get away from Letitia. Resting his bloodied sword against his shoulder, Albin casually asks if she is hurt while complaining about the rude interruption. Trembling on the hard ground, a deeply shaken Letitia quietly admits that she was merely startled by her first monster encounter. Realizing her profound vulnerability, Albin intensely scolds himself for forgetting how terrifying a first monster attack truly is. Moving with sudden, undeniable warmth, Albin fiercely embraces the bewildered girl as she softly gasps his name. Holding her close in the quiet forest, Albin sincerely whispers how truly glad he is that she escaped unharmed. Completely overwhelmed by his unexpected affection, a heavily blushing Letitia can only utter a soft, embarrassed murmur. Breaking the tender silence, Letitia nervously calls out to Albin with a deeply conflicted expression. Pausing his movements, Albin curiously turns his attention back to his anxious bride, silently wondering what she wants to ask. Gazing up at him with immense confusion, Letitia outright asks why he continues to show her such unwarranted kindness. Caught entirely off guard by her blunt question, Albin stares back in stunned, wide-eyed silence. Erupting with sudden frustration, Letitia fiercely reminds him that she is merely the doomed victim of a forced political marriage. Maintaining his absolute composure, Albin calmly agrees with her assessment regarding the blatant political nature of their union. Shifting his gaze with newfound intensity, Albin swiftly clarifies that the political advantage is merely the superficial surface of his true intentions. Desperately pressing the issue, Letitia demands to know why he did not just abandon her after officially securing the Barrow family's vital support. Flashing a brilliant, disarming smile, Albin playfully jokes that he simply wants to get endlessly lovey-dovey with his incredibly cute wife. Instantly dropping his cheerful facade, Albin seriously declares his absolute intent to uncover her past actions and identify her true enemies. Lowering her gaze with a heavy, sorrowful expression, Letitia softly offers to give her overly stubborn husband one final piece of crucial advice. Refusing her desperate plea to remain uninvolved, Albin boldly asserts that he is already entirely tangled up in her dangerous fate. Staring into his eyes with chilling seriousness, Letitia shockingly warns him to ruthlessly persecute her if he truly wishes to protect the Ordran family. A sharp jolt of pure shock violently courses through Albin as he processes her deeply disturbing and sacrificial warning. Drifting into a dark memory, Letitia quietly reveals that her tragic, inescapable marriage partner had been strictly decided since she was only 5 years old. Recognizing the infamous name, Albin swiftly asks if her former betrothed was the notoriously powerful Duke Maro Beltori. Recalling her lost childhood innocence, Letitia remembers earnestly hoping that her future husband would be a wonderfully kind person. Shattering that innocent illusion, the narrative brutally exposes Duke Maro as an endlessly foolish man gleefully hoarding massive piles of gold. Embracing his immense corruption, the vile Duke Maro lazily wriggles around in absolute luxury while indulging in base, shameless pleasures. Bursting into the decadent chamber, a young Letitia abruptly interrupts Moro's hedonistic playtime, prompting his deeply annoyed response. Marching forward with unyielding resolve, Letitia forcefully presents a stack of urgent documents demanding his immediate, undivided attention. Slamming the papers down, Letitia fiercely warns Maro that his devastating tax increases are actively destroying the innocent lives of his suffering people. Completely unmoved by her passionate plea, the arrogant Duke merely scoffs with absolute, sickening disdain. Glaring down at her with pure malice, Maro viciously commands his mere political pipeline to completely stop sticking her nose into his corrupt politics. Looming over her like an untouchable tyrant, Maro solidifies his absolute, crushing dominance over the desperate young noblewoman. Utterly paralyzed by his staggering cruelty, Letitia violently flinches as the devastating reality of her horrific engagement finally crushes her spirit. Slipping from her trembling fingers, the heavily researched tax documents scatter uselessly across the cold, unforgiving floor. Devastated by the cruel insult, Letitia quietly sobs over being reduced to a mere political pipeline. Recalling her childhood lessons, she mourns the loss of the fiancé she was taught to strictly devote herself to. A grim memory violently surfaces, revealing the dark and desolate reality of a deeply suffering territory. Standing silently in the shadows, Letitia witnesses the horrifying, destructive toll of unchecked aristocratic greed. An anguished, desperate cry for a dying father violently shatters the heavy silence of the impoverished slums. Starving children beg their older siblings for food while desperate coughs echo continuously through the ruined streets. Emaciated bodies slump against cold stone walls as the brutal weight of absolute poverty crushes the innocent citizens. Weeping parents furiously beg for forgiveness, completely unable to save their sick and starving children from death. Villagers grimly note the 12th death this month, hopelessly accepting that absolutely no food remains for anyone. Paralyzed by the devastating tragedy, Letitia realizes with pure horror that her people will completely perish at this current rate. Glistening piles of hoarded gold mock the dying citizens, perfectly symbolizing Morrow's absolute corruption and endless selfishness. Refusing to let Morrow blindly squander the territory's precious wealth, Letitia makes a terrifying, life-altering decision. She fiercely resolves to secretly seize the people's stolen taxes to completely save them from mass starvation. 3 grueling years pass rapidly, heavily cementing her dangerous and desperate rebellion against the corrupt regime. Standing defiantly in a grand hall, a much older Letitia fiercely confronts the arrogant Duke Morrow. Proudly declaring her name, Letitia publicly and violently dissolves her nightmarish engagement once and for all. Scoffing with absolute disdain, Morrow maliciously questions the sheer audacity of her sudden, brazen outburst. He ruthlessly exposes her secret actions, publicly accusing her of squandering family assets and embezzling the territory's taxes behind his back. Shocked whispers erupt violently through the noble crowd as they reel from the scandalous allegations against the Barrow daughter. Staring her down with icy malice, Morrow coldly declares that a thief remains a thief regardless of her noble reasons. Desperately trying to explain the starving truth, Letitia stammers helplessly against his overwhelming public accusation. Morrow aggressively shoves her aside as swooning noblewomen cheer his name, permanently banishing Letitia from his territory. Tumbling forcefully to the hard floor, Letitia realizes the agonizing truth of her absolute, humiliating defeat. Bidding a final farewell to Lord Beltory, she tragically accepts that her cherished childhood dreams are permanently shattered. Swallowing her bitter sorrow, Letitia sternly reminds herself that she completely lacks the right to cry over her own sacrifice. Returning home in complete disgrace, her furious father violently kicks her out of the Barrow estate without a shred of mercy. Having perfectly prepared for this absolute ruin, Letitia obediently accepts her harsh banishment and calmly walks away. 6 long months later, the exiled noblewoman officially receives her cursed new destination regarding Baron Albin Ordran. Riding silently in a lonely carriage, she painfully acknowledges her dreadful journey toward her brand-new fiancé. Believing Albin is an arrogant, lazy monster, she grimly accepts this terrible marriage as divine punishment for her supposed sins. Suddenly, warm memories of Albin's unexpected kindness and genuine smiles fiercely crash through her dark assumptions. Overwhelmed by his pure sincerity, she realizes he truly sees her and actively tries to build real, unwavering trust. Terrified of losing hope again, she furiously decides she absolutely cannot drag Albin into the dangerous chaos of her ruined past. Snapping violently back to the present, tears stream down Letitia's face as she desperately wonders what she should do next. Stepping forward to interrupt her dark thoughts, Albin boldly declares he has heard enough, while Seabass confidently confirms Letitia was entirely framed. Albin Odrin violently ponders a deadly strategy, his dark mind racing with lethal possibilities. He gathers his terrifying resolve, fully prepared to execute his sinister and bloody plan. Complications instantly arise as the schemer realizes the chaotic situation demands a much more nuanced approach. As Lord Albin coldly considers hiring kidnappers and torture experts to drown his target in the sea, his subordinate interrupts to declare the story is far from over. The gravity of the situation completely shifts as an unexpected and world-shattering truth finally comes to light. Seabass gravely confirms the devastating rumor that Lady Letitia truly embezzled the Beltory family's immense wealth. Stunned by the overwhelming revelation, Albin absorbs the crushing weight of Letitia's alleged betrayal. Furious denial erupts as Albin vehemently rejects the impossible notion of Letitia committing such a despicable crime. Seabass urgently commands his master to calm down, revealing a hidden, noble motive behind Letitia's drastic actions. Albin listens intensely, the fiery rage in his eyes cooling into a sharp, dangerous focus. The truth strikes like lightning as Seabass reveals she siphoned the territory's taxes solely to protect impoverished, abandoned children. The false narrative of her reckless spending shatters, exposing her massive investments meant to eradicate poverty and elevate living standards. Overwhelmed by her sheer selflessness, Albin suddenly remembers Letitia's deep fondness for children, perfectly aligning with her secret crusade. Realization violently dawns that her past hostility was a desperate, sacrificial shield meant to protect him from vicious persecution. Absolute disgust washes over Albin as he realizes Letitia was cruelly forced to clean up an incompetent fool's disastrous mess. Albin's voice drops to a lethal whisper as he summons Seabass for his next, devastating command. A dark, terrifying aura erupts from Albin as he bluntly assesses the profoundly enraging situation. Prompted to speak frankly, Seabass questions how this agonizing truth has fundamentally shifted his master's core. Blazing with absolute fury, Albin commands Seabass to help him utterly destroy the scumbags who dared to frame Letitia. The atmosphere crackles with impending vengeance as their lethal pact is silently and fiercely sealed. Confusion momentarily shatters the tension as Letitia is completely blindsided by Albin's sudden, chaotic declaration. Albin nonchalantly chews his food with infuriating calmness, completely unfazed by the explosive situation he just created. Disbelief drips from Letitia's trembling voice as she desperately demands a repetition of his shocking statement. Unbothered, Albin repeats that he deliberately unleashed a dangerous, calculated rumor into the wild. He casually reveals that high society now whispers of Albin Odrin plotting violent revenge against Duke Morrow to avenge Lady Letitia's grievances. Munching his food effortlessly, Albin confirms his masterstroke of psychological warfare to a completely stunned Letitia. Albin swiftly orders the panicking Letitia to calm down and blindly trust his chaotic, overarching strategy. Terrified for his safety, Letitia warns that Duke Morrow will instantly target him for this blatant, suicidal provocation. Her immense fear violently shifts to utter confusion as Albin hints at a second, invisible layer to his psychological trap. With a sly smirk, Albin confesses that he simultaneously launched a contradictory rumor to completely paralyze their enemies. He reveals the second rumor claims he despises Letitia and is offering Duke Morrow a fortune to secretly assassinate her. Albin casually leans back, basking in the sheer, unadulterated brilliance of his dual-layered deception. He confirms the absolute insanity of his plan, successfully trapping their foes in an inescapable web of contradictory lies. Albin delivers the killing blow to her doubts, explaining that rumors are deadliest against those actively harboring dark secrets. As realization finally dawns on Letitia, Albin smiles with dark triumph, knowing his psychological trap is flawlessly set and ready to spring. The sprawling estate of the Bertoli family stands quietly as shadows of new, dangerous schemes begin to gather. Utterly bewildered by the conflicting information, Letitia realizes this new whisper is the exact opposite of the previous rumor. Albin casually reveals that town gossips are already painting him as a monster who imprisons Letitia and treats her like a worn-out rag. Stunned by this deliberate self-sabotage, Letitia desperately demands to know why he would intentionally ruin his own reputation. Meanwhile, Duke Morrow falls perfectly into the trap, concluding that the rumors of Albin's bitter rift with Letitia might actually be true. Morrow's mind races with dark possibilities, even suspecting that Albin intends to violently assassinate his own wife. Imagining Albin's terrible personality clashing with Letitia's strict frugality, Morrow completely buys into the illusion of their toxic marriage. Realizing that mere whispers aren't enough to spring the trap, Albin calculates that one final, decisive move is still missing. Letitia finally grasps the psychological brilliance of the plan, realizing Morrow is likely worrying himself sick over the fabricated chaos. A tense, heavy silence stretches between them as the immense weight of their impending confrontation settles in. Staring intensely into her eyes, Albin declares that he needs her to be the decisive factor to execute the killing blow. Riddled with guilt, Letitia immediately refuses, unwilling to violently drag the Ordran family into her own personal quest for revenge. Lowering her head in deep shame, she tearfully apologizes for being utterly incapable of accepting his dangerous help. Breaking through her agonizing guilt, Albin softly confesses that he has already uncovered the full, heartbreaking truth behind her alleged crimes. Blazing with righteous fury, he assures her this goes beyond her revenge, as his own pride completely refuses to let this injustice stand. Despite his comforting words, Letitia bitterly insists that her hands remain forever stained by undeniable wrongdoing. Albin immediately shatters her self-loathing by reminding her that every single crime was committed solely to save the suffering people of her territory. He firmly rejects her misguided guilt, refusing to let her carry the heavy burden of a villain any longer. Testing his ultimate resolve, Letitia anxiously asks if knowing her dark truth fills him with any lingering regret. Without a single moment of hesitation, Albin fiercely declares that his feelings are the exact, fiery opposite of regret. His eyes soften with profound affection as he confesses his deep, unwavering joy at finally knowing the real, selfless woman standing before him. With unbreakable conviction, Albin swears to his core that he has already made up his mind to fiercely cherish her for the rest of his life. Vowing never to persecute or abandon her, he forcefully claims her as the absolute only woman truly worthy of being his wife. Utterly overwhelmed by his explosive declaration of love, Letitia breathlessly whispers his name as tears threaten to spill. His romantic aura instantly shifts back to pure, lethal intent as he promises to brutally punish the mastermind who caused her suffering. Burning with dark, unyielding rage, Albin declares that Duke Morrow's impending destruction is an absolute, unavoidable certainty. A gentle, amazed smile graces Letitia's face as she softly notes that his incredibly noble vow doesn't sound very villain-like at all. Flashing a wicked grin, Albin reminds her that the universe's greatest villains are always the ones who cherish their families the most. The scene sharply cuts to the shadowy, grim confines of the Ordran territory's food storage warehouse. Stepping smoothly out from the darkness, Letitia boldly apologizes for keeping her sinister contact waiting. The hulking, treacherous figure of Duke Morrow silently emerges from the gloom, confirming that Albin's psychological trap has sprung flawlessly. Morrow immediately insults his grim surroundings, complaining that the bleak warehouse smells absolutely musty and decrepit. Standing her ground flawlessly, Letitia fiercely demands respect and coldly notes that his arrogant insolence remains completely unchanged. Smirking with dark victory, Morrow admits his profound surprise at ever receiving a secret, desperate letter directly from her. Playing her deceptive role to absolute perfection, Letitia bitterly lies that she has reached her breaking point and can no longer endure being Albin's wife. Grasping a heavily written letter, Morrow smugly notes that it reads more like a cursed object filled with pathetic complaints about Baron Ordran. He reads the desperate pleas as Letitia begs for salvation from the Ordran family while falsely praising Morrow as a far better man. Addressing Letitia directly, Morrow mockingly acknowledges Baron Ordran's terrible reputation and feigns sympathy for her agonizing suffering. Morrow coldly confirms to himself that this miserable narrative is exactly what she currently claims. Erupting into dark, manic laughter, Morrow completely revels in the absolute absurdity of his perceived victory. The sinister atmosphere shifts as Morrow confidently calls out Baron Ordran's name to reveal his hidden trump card. Morrow whirls around in absolute shock as Albin suddenly appears before him, completely defying his expectations. A tense, suffocating silence violently engulfs the room as Morrow desperately tries to process Albin's sudden arrival. Gloating prematurely, Morrow brutally mocks Letitia by revealing his own secret alliance with Baron Ordran. Morrow coldly declares that her pathetic plea for help was the fatal trigger inevitably sealing her own destruction. He smugly details how the conflicting rumors about Albin and Letitia's relationship initially confused the entire town. Tapping the letter, Morrow admits her desperate plea firmly convinced him their bitter feud was the absolute truth. A dark, arrogant smirk crosses Morrow's face as he revels in his supposedly brilliant deduction. Venomously dropping his facade, Morrow brutally brands Letitia as a dull, charmless woman he always utterly despised. He fiercely boasts about acquiring a highly capable ally in Albin who was supposedly betrayed by her treacherous actions. Morrow coldly reflects on his past powerlessness, lamenting that he could only cancel his engagement with the Duke's daughter back then. A loyal, armed subordinate steps silently from the shadows, eagerly awaiting Morrow's final, deadly command. Morrow's eyes narrow with lethal intent as he mutters Letitia Barrow's name with absolute venom. Pointing a condemning finger, Morrow ruthlessly orders his assassin to execute her immediately. The assassin explodes forward with terrifying speed, launching a lethal strike to fulfill his master's grim command. A sudden, violent clash erupts as Albin fiercely intercepts the deadly blow to protect Letitia. The overwhelming force of Albin's parry completely shatters the assassin's momentum in a spectacular flash of steel. Albin casually mocks the Bertoli family guards, entirely unimpressed by their pathetic and weak display of strength. Morrow stares in stunned disbelief as his foolproof assassination plot violently crumbles into absolute ruin. Letitia gracefully emerges unharmed, warmly praising Albin for executing their brilliant trap flawlessly. Albin immediately returns the compliment, acknowledging her incredible acting as the perfect bait for their enemy. Morrow trembles with uncontrollable fury as he finally grasps the staggering magnitude of their unified deception. Letitia stands firmly and proudly beside Albin, presenting an unbreakable front against their defeated foe. Enraged beyond reason, Morrow fiercely accuses Albin of deliberately setting him up for this catastrophic downfall. Albin viciously counters the accusation, reminding Morrow that he was the treacherous coward who hit her first. Stepping menacingly forward, Albin sarcastically mocks the pathetic and hypocritical accusation of being set up. Albin closes the distance with predatory grace, completely cornering the trembling and defenseless Duke. A terrifyingly calm smile spreads across Albin's face as he prepares to deliver his final, devastating judgment. Morrow's arrogant confidence completely shatters, leaving him sweating profusely under Albin's deadly, unyielding gaze. A sinister, triumphant laugh echoes from Albin as he firmly and absolutely seals Morrow's inescapable doom. Furious and completely defeated, Morrow viciously vows that he will never forgive his enemies. He glares at the triumphant duo, utterly appalled to realize they successfully conspired together to orchestrate his downfall. Unfazed by the explosive outburst, Albin casually dismisses them as a noisy bunch while admitting he already knows their pathetic schemes. Roaring with arrogant fury, Morrow demands to know if a fallen lady and a mere baron truly think they can defy him. A sudden, heavy thud loudly echoes through the room, instantly shattering the corrupt Duke's arrogant tirade. The heavy atmosphere sharply shifts as an unexpected, powerful presence prepares to make a grand entrance. A commanding figure steps firmly into the light, completely shifting the balance of power in an instant. A calm voice smoothly cuts through the tension, suggesting they simply need to perfectly justify Lord Alban's righteous position. The imposing newcomer glares sharply at the culprits, radiating an undeniable aura of absolute, terrifying authority. Commanding the room instantly, the esteemed Excellency Crayon demands that Duke Mauro Bertoli stand down and recognize his authority. Completely blindsided by the sudden arrival of Excellency Crayon, a panicking Mauro desperately demands to know why he is there. Excellency Crayon coldly reveals that by sheer coincidence, he overheard something truly outrageous and unforgivable. He fiercely expresses his absolute disgust that Mauro would dare command the assassination of the Duke Barrow family's noble daughter. Crayon casually explains that his good friend Seabass formally invited him for a pleasant trip to the Ordran territory. The tension instantly skyrockets as Crayon produces the highly incriminating letters secretly exchanged between Mauro and Alban. Absolute desperation takes over as Mauro frantically screams that the letters are nothing but Alban Ordran's wicked, fabricated scheme. Alban calmly addresses Excellency Crayon, perfectly playing his innocent role in this masterful psychological trap. Crayon decisively notes that Alban's letters cleverly lack any mention of disposing of Letitia, solidly settling the matter against Mauro. Feigning complete innocence, Alban lightly brushes off Mauro's panicked accusations with a mockingly confused shrug. Seething with pure venom, Mauro realizes with sheer horror just how flawlessly Alban orchestrated his utter ruin. Letitia silently marvels at Alban's wicked brilliance in leaving zero evidence while purposely letting Crayon hear the kill order. Mauro violently grits his teeth in absolute despair, entirely cornered by the overwhelming weight of undeniable, damning evidence. With undeniable, booming authority, Excellency Crayon firmly orders his guards to take Duke Mauro Bertoli into immediate custody. Clicking his tongue in bitter frustration, Mauro realizes his immense political and social power has completely evaporated. In a desperate, high-stakes final gamble, Duke Mauro loudly challenges Baron Alban Ordran to a formal, bloody duel. The bold declaration violently shatters the tense silence, instantly dragging the political conflict onto a dangerous physical battlefield. A dark, predatory smirk stretches across Alban's face as he realizes he can finally beat the hell out of Mauro fair and square. Feigning total boredom, Alban casually sighs and dismisses the dramatic, deadly challenge as a massive pain. Throwing off his outer coat, Alban effortlessly prepares his body for the impending brutal physical clash. He glares menacingly at his pathetic opponent, signaling that his feigned reluctance has instantly transformed into lethal intent. Stepping confidently onto the makeshift battlefield, Alban radiates an aura of absolutely terrifying physical superiority. Stepping back to safely observe, Hugues de Crayon formally declares himself the official, unbiased witness to this intense duel. Before the sudden violence erupts, Alban coldly pauses the action to ask his trembling opponent one final, mocking question. Completely unhinged by the humiliation, Mauro explosively vows to murder Alban, fully giving in to his chaotic, blinding rage. With a ferocious, echoing battle cry, Mauro fiercely charges forward to initiate their violently anticipated duel. Alban coldly demands to know if Mauro intends to offer a heartfelt apology to Lady Letitia, promising mercy if he complies. Mauro mutters a dismissive response, clearly rejecting the generous chance for redemption. Enraged by the ultimatum, Mauro lunges forward with a deadly strike while screaming for his opponent to die. Alban effortlessly evades the attack, calmly declaring that he will no longer hold back. Mocking his opponent's failed strike, Alban coldly asks if Mauro was actually trying to kill him. Mauro cries out in agony as he clutches his severely injured arm in complete disbelief. Panic sets in as Mauro desperately wonders why the notoriously lazy Alban Ordran is impossibly strong and completely untouchable. Seething with intense frustration, Mauro glares helplessly at his overwhelmingly powerful foe. Alban coldly reveals that his terrifying strength comes from half a year of intense, grueling training. He strikes a powerful, commanding stance that completely dominates the tension-filled battlefield. Alban fiercely points out that while Mauro was busy exploiting women and making his people suffer, Letitia was desperately trying to save them. He solemnly reflects on the absolute purity of Letitia's selfless actions. Mauro arrogantly stammers that the commoners will simply multiply on their own no matter how many die. Alban furiously commands the corrupt and heartless Duke to shut his mouth. He passionately declares that nobles are mere insects leeching off the people, a harsh truth Letitia fully understood. Alban fiercely emphasizes that her ultimate goal was always to desperately save the Bertoli territory. He lunges forward to deliver a crushing physical blow to drive his righteous point home. Groaning in immense pain, Mauro staggers under the heavy weight of Alban's righteous fury. Alban fiercely readies himself to completely obliterate the pathetic, trembling Duke. He violently condemns Morrow for callously trampling all over Letitia's pure and desperate feelings. Driven by blinding rage, Morrow recklessly charges forward with a deranged, desperate scream. Albin swiftly maneuvers with predatory grace to intercept the chaotic assault. He flawlessly counters the desperate attack with overwhelming, terrifying precision. A devastating, heavy impact brutally shatters Morrow's remaining physical defenses. The brutal physical clash violently throws the defeated Duke completely off balance. Albin locks eyes with his broken enemy, his intense gaze burning with unyielding, lethal intent. Morrow screams in absolute, piercing agony as Albin delivers an excruciatingly painful strike. Staring down at the pathetic man, Albin coldly insists that Morrow must also physically taste the pain he caused. He fiercely demands that Morrow experience the exact same crushing despair that Letitia endured. Morrow trembles in absolute terror, wildly wondering if he is about to brutally die right there on the spot. Albin aggressively raises his fist, fully prepared to deliver the final, devastating blow. A sudden, desperate realization flashes as a voice prepares to stop him from crossing the ultimate line. Letitia calmly approaches the panting Albin, gently warning him that any further violence will only defile his own soul. She softly but firmly declares that he has already done more than enough to secure their victory. Breathing heavily, Albin finally relaxes his aggressive stance, silently acknowledging her comforting and peaceful intervention. Two figures stand locked in a breathless, silent confrontation as the tension of the battlefield completely dissipates into the quiet air. Gazing intently at his companion, Albin momentarily loses his voice, desperately searching his mind for the exact words needed to express his overwhelming emotions. Breaking the silence with gentle sincerity, Letitia expresses her profound gratitude to Albin for fiercely losing his temper and defending her honor. A warm, radiant energy seemingly envelopes the duo as their shared understanding immediately deepens their unbreakable bond. Startled yet deeply moved, Albin reacts softly to her heartfelt vulnerability, letting her sincere appreciation wash over his battle-weary soul. Stepping closer, Albin confidently assures Letitia that securing a little violent payback was perfectly justified, checking earnestly to ensure she feels entirely satisfied. A thunderous roar of absolute victory echoes across the arena as the formidable Baron Albin Ordran is officially declared the indisputable champion of the duel. Despite the lingering adrenaline of the brutal clash, a reassuring wave of profound calmness steadily anchors the triumphant warrior. Smiling with unshakable confidence, Albin boldly proclaims that their flawlessly synchronized performance proves they are destined to become an absolutely spectacular couple. Letitia wholeheartedly echoes his ambitious sentiment, firmly agreeing that their combined cunning will undoubtedly make them the ultimate partnership. Embracing this thrilling new reality, Albin officially marks this victorious day as the glorious beginning of their unparalleled, unified reign. Leaning into their dark reputations, they playfully theorize that this unholy alliance will forge the ultimate, terrifying union between a notorious villainess and a formidable villain. Reveling in their shared infamy, the triumphant duo proudly crowns themselves the worst couple in existence, representing a catastrophic fusion of two absolute evils. Exactly 1 month after his blood-soaked duel with Morrow, a visibly panicked Albin desperately begs his loyal butler Seabass for urgent guidance. Pacing the room with overwhelming dread, Albin confesses that holding a grand wedding ceremony with Letitia today has completely shattered his usual ironclad composure. Sternly adjusting his master's collar, Seabass sharply commands the trembling groom to stand tall and project the unyielding dignity rightfully expected of the Ordran bloodline. Clutching his chest in sheer agony, Albin astonishingly realizes that this paralyzing matrimonial anxiety vastly eclipses the raw terror he experienced while slaughtering his very first goblin. Softening his strict demeanor, Seabass gently reminds his panicked master that this magnificent ceremony is a beautiful, joyous stage meant to celebrate the glorious start of their new life together. Staring blankly ahead, Albin reflects on how this massive, nerve-wracking spectacle was entirely initiated by Letitia's casual suggestion to formally solidify their partnership. Countless chaotic thoughts violently race through Albin's overwhelmed mind as he frantically visualizes the heavy, irreversible reality of his rapidly approaching marriage. Snapping him back to harsh reality, Seabass sternly warns that Lady Letitia will be profoundly disappointed if her groom fails to maintain a sharp, commanding sense of tension. Fueled by a burning, desperate desire to witness Letitia's breathtaking beauty in her pristine wedding dress, Albin fiercely forces his scattered resolve back into focus. Chuckling with fond nostalgia, Seabass affectionately reveals that Albin's late father famously slapped his own face to conquer the exact same pre-wedding jitters. Intrigued by this unexpected revelation, Albin listens silently, finding a strange, grounding comfort in mirroring the hidden vulnerabilities of his predecessor. A thoughtful hum escapes Albin's lips as he processes this intimate family history, considering he lost his parents long before his memory could ever capture them. Absorbing the butler's heartwarming anecdote, Albin feels the suffocating grip of his wedding anxiety finally begin to loosen its hold on his chest. Puffing his chest with immense honor, Seabass proudly declares that faithfully serving the noble Ordran family for 2 consecutive generations remains his life's greatest triumph. Struck by the old man's unwavering loyalty, Albin humbly acknowledges that having such a devoted servant makes the heavy burden of being a master entirely worthwhile. Looking directly into the elderly butler's eyes with profound sincerity, Albin emotionally declares that Seabass has always been a true, indispensable father figure to him. Completely blindsided by the raw affection, Seabass freezes in place as a wave of overwhelming emotion rapidly floods his ancient, devoted heart. Desperately attempting to mask his sudden tears, Seabass clears his throat and abruptly changes the subject, urgently reminding Albin that the time to depart has arrived. Weeping uncontrollably with absolute joy, Seabass loudly celebrates that desperately raising Albin was worth every struggle, instantly prompting the flustered master to protest being called a brat. Offering a genuine, heartfelt smile of gratitude, Albin peacefully confirms that the chaotic emotional exchange has successfully eradicated the last remnants of his nervous tension. As the groom finally marches toward his destiny, the bustling scene shifts seamlessly to the bride's lavish quarters, where intense preparations are reaching their dazzling climax. Hovering anxiously over the stunning bride, a caring servant gently asks Lady Letitia if her nerves have settled or if a fleeting sense of loneliness plagues her before the grand ceremony. A heavy silence fills the lavish dressing room as the anxious bride sits perfectly still in deep contemplation. Staring thoughtfully into the ornate mirror, Letitia finally realizes why she felt absolutely no suffocating nerves during her previous engagement party with Morrow. Clutching her chest, she acknowledges her heart is pounding wildly now because she is finally uniting with a man she genuinely loves. The stunning bride lowers her gaze as a chaotic whirlwind of complicated emotions begins swirling intensely within her busy mind. Despite her undeniable joy, Letitia admits to a lingering, vague anxiety about whether she can truly build a successful relationship with Albin. Brushing her dark fears aside, she warmly embraces the sheer, overflowing happiness that completely eclipses any lingering doubts. The quiet moment peacefully stretches as she carefully prepares her racing mind for the life-changing ceremony ahead. Interrupting her deep thoughts, Seabass respectfully announces his arrival to formally perform the traditional lowering of the bridal veil. Blushing slightly at her own intense emotions, Letitia quietly reflects that feeling this deeply nervous is completely unlike her usual self. Taking a deep, steadying breath, the beautiful bride resolves that embracing these terrifyingly bright emotions is entirely acceptable just for today. Smiling softly to herself, Letitia firmly decides that letting go of her famously stoic composure is perfectly fine for this momentous occasion. Meanwhile, a profoundly panicked Albin clutches his stomach, agonizing over how terribly his wedding nerves are violently twisting his insides. The towering groom violently shakes his head in absolute distress, desperately trying to focus on the impending nuptials. Breathing heavily, Albin severely struggles to maintain his dignified composure as the heavy weight of the grand ceremony bears down upon him. Frantically correcting his scrambled thoughts, Albin sharply reminds himself that lifting the bride's delicate veil happens much later in the ceremony. Mumbling the precise sequence of events aloud, Albin heavily fixates on Seabass walking Letitia down the aisle before their sacred vows and rings. Sweating profusely while cursing the minutely detailed wedding flow, Albin's heart nearly stops as a booming voice proudly announces the bride's grand entrance. The heavy chapel doors swing dramatically open to reveal a breathtakingly radiant Letitia stepping elegantly into the aisle. The majestic atmosphere crackles with pure anticipation as the stunning bride slowly makes her glorious way toward her anxious groom. A heavy, reverent silence instantly falls over the grand hall as the beautiful bride steps into the radiant light. Staring in absolute awe, Albin stands completely mesmerized by how incredibly beautiful his radiant bride looks in her pristine gown. Completely captivated by her glowing presence, Albin internally compares his stunning bride to an ethereal, flawless angel descending from the heavens. Upgrading her to a majestic goddess aloud, Albin accidentally startles Letitia, prompting her to nervously ask if there is something on her blushing face. Stumbling over his scattered words, Albin frantically stammers out that he was merely overwhelmed by her absolute, unmatched beauty. Blushing furiously, Letitia playfully chides his intense praise, though Albin firmly insists she is unquestionably the most beautiful woman in the entire world. Catching her bashful flush, Albin instantly relaxes as he happily realizes that his bride's chest is bursting with the exact same nervous tension. Smiling warmly at his sweet reassurance, Letitia expresses her deep gratitude and softly confesses just how truly happy she feels beside him. The officiant solemnly begins the sacred proceedings, formally asking if they pledge to respect each other in sickness and in health until death parts them. Raising his dignified voice to fill the silent hall, the officiant commands them to vow their eternal love for an entire lifetime. Staring deeply into his bride's eyes, Albin confidently and proudly declares his unwavering vow to love her endlessly. Trembling suddenly, Letitia shockingly apologizes as a devastating wave of terror strikes her regarding whether a fallen lady like her truly deserves such happiness. Startled by her sudden heartbreaking vulnerability, Albin gently calls out Letitia's name with deep, loving concern etched across his face. The devastating weight of her past reputation crashes down upon the trembling bride as she fiercely struggles to hold back her falling tears. Tears finally welling in her delicate eyes, Letitia tearfully and desperately questions if it is truly acceptable for someone like her to experience such immense joy. Reaching out with fierce, undeniable determination, Albin completely shatters her lingering doubts by aggressively promising to make her infinitely happy for the rest of their lives. Albin fiercely reassures Letitia that she absolutely deserves to experience this profound happiness. Gazing deeply into her eyes, he boldly declares her to be the most wonderful person in the entire world. Presenting the delicate wedding ring, Albin passionately reminds her that this band symbolizes their unbreakable, eternal promise. Overwhelmed with immense joy, Letitia tearfully confesses that this is undoubtedly the absolute happiest moment of her entire life. A heavy, emotional silence envelopes the majestic hall as the weight of their beautiful union settles over them. Albin gently interrupts her swirling thoughts, softly pointing out that it is far too early to crown this moment as their ultimate peak. He confidently vows that this grand ceremony is merely the beginning and promises to endlessly multiply her joy throughout their lives. Letitia playfully realizes that his endless devotion means they will be debating their absolute happiest moment until they grow old together. Watching her radiant expression, Albin quietly reflects that a genuine, carefree smile suits his beautiful bride perfectly. Sharing a warm, resonant laugh, the triumphant couple happily agrees that the endless joys of their shared life have only just begun. Internally, Albin fiercely resolves to sacrifice absolutely anything required to protect her precious, glowing smile forever. The scene shifts dynamically, signaling a thrilling new chapter as their glorious wedding day transitions into a much wider world. A mysterious, sharply dressed figure observes from the shadowed corridors, silently evaluating the newly formed powerhouse couple. This unknown observer muses aloud that Albin and Letitia prove to be a profoundly fascinating, dangerous pair upon their first meeting. Resting his chin on his hand, the mysterious man carefully contemplates his next strategic move regarding the formidable newlyweds. Pondering the kingdom's shifting politics, the calculating figure prepares to make a major, game-changing proposal concerning their immediate future. With a sharp smirk, the man firmly decides to officially recommend the powerful couple for a highly prestigious, exclusive opportunity. He boldly pitches his radical recommendation directly to Headmaster Faust, eagerly awaiting the venerable leader's absolute judgment. The grand office falls into a tense, heavy silence as the high-ranking academy officials absorb this highly unexpected, controversial proposal. Another official immediately protests the dangerous idea, aggressively citing the dark, villainous rumors constantly swirling around the notorious couple. Headmaster Faust Melchizedek sharply cuts through the chaotic arguments, decisively proposing a special entrance exam to ruthlessly test their true capabilities. The narrative abruptly returns to the bustling Ordran estate, where the newlyweds prepare for their impending departure to the Royal Academy. Tearful servants swarm Letitia, promising to send homegrown vegetables while practically begging her to return if the royal capital becomes too painful. Smiling warmly at her devoted staff, Letitia gently comforts them by confidently promising to return safely after her 3-year academic journey. The emotional maids continue to weep uncontrollably, completely devastated by the heartbreaking prospect of losing their beloved, brilliant mistress. Several dramatic maids practically throw themselves at Letitia, hysterically begging for permission to accompany her to the royal capital. Letitia maintains her flawless, graceful composure despite the chaotic, tear-filled farewell unfolding dramatically around her. She strictly but kindly denies their frantic requests, commanding the staff to faithfully protect the Ordran mansion and territory in her absence. Watching the maids completely ignore him to fawn over his wife, Albin awkwardly reminds the weeping crowd that he is actually the head of the house. Seabass smoothly approaches the slightly deflated Albin, instantly drawing his master's attention away from the dramatic, wailing maids. The loyal, battle-hardened butler fixes Albin with a serious, intense stare, preparing to deliver his final, critical parting wisdom. Seabass firmly warns Albin to exercise extreme, unwavering caution while navigating the treacherous, unpredictable political waters of the Royal Academy. Bowing deeply with ultimate respect, the devoted butler pledges to unleash his formidable, monstrous strength the very second Albin calls for him. Grinning with unshakable confidence, Albin reassures Seabass that surviving 6 months of the butler's hellish training guarantees his absolute success. Stepping boldly toward their awaiting carriage, Albin and Letitia officially begin their thrilling journey to acquire the prestigious dignity befitting true nobles. Having recently turned 16, the young newlyweds confidently prepare to embrace their thrilling new lives together. Arriving with a commanding presence, Albin and Letitia officially enroll in the prestigious Magdala Familia Royal Academy. A formal academy attendant greets them immediately, while Albin groans that the agonizingly long carriage ride felt like pure torture. The attendant respectfully informs the couple that Letitia's preparation room is ready and Albin's rigorous entrance exam awaits. Stepping confidently into the Grand Academy halls, the powerful duo prepares to briefly part ways for their respective trials. Dismissing any lingering concerns, Albin casually assures his wife that Moro's pathetic family simply wants to play games with him. Pausing momentarily, a curious Letitia gently asks her confident husband what exactly this mysterious entrance exam entails. Smirking with absolute swagger, Albin casually replies that he is just going to play along with some boring entertainment. Lurking in the shadows, a corrupted academy examiner bitterly mutters that the arrogant brat has finally arrived. Stepping into the designated arena, Albin confidently strides forward to face his impending, supposedly rigged challenge. The scheming examiner ruthlessly plots to frame Albin, maliciously gloating over the hefty bribe he received from the Bertolli family. Instructor Bastian sneers at Albin's arriving form, eagerly preparing to shove a pathetic failure right into the boy's spineless face. Bursting onto the scene with chaotic energy, Albin mockingly greets the examiner by loudly celebrating his own supposed tardiness. Bastian flinches at the boy's sheer audacity, completely thrown off balance by Albin's spectacularly disrespectful entrance. Quickly recovering his malicious composure, Bastian furiously decides to use high-pressure intimidation to completely crush the boy's spirit. Barking with manufactured outrage, the corrupt instructor furiously demands to know if Albin even has any real intention of enrolling. Unfazed by the deafening shouting, Albin simply stares back with an utterly bored and completely unimpressed expression. Completely losing his temper, Bastian furiously screams at the arrogant brat to watch his incredibly disrespectful tone. Yawning lazily, Albin brutally points out that the carriage was perfectly on time and the impatient examiner was simply waiting on his own accord. Grinding his teeth in absolute rage, Bastian aggressively declares the official start of the practical entrance exam. Pointing toward a distant target, the furious instructor commands the inexperienced noble to successfully aim and fire his magic. Bastian ruthlessly mocks the boy in his mind, absolutely certain that the untrained noble cannot possibly perform such a feat. Smugly crossing his arms, the examiner notes that magic cannot legally be learned until after a student officially enrolls. Defying all expectations instantly, Albin raises his hand and casually unleashes a devastating darkness flame spell. Bastian gasps in absolute shock as the overwhelming magical energy violently erupts directly before his trembling eyes. The dark, blazing inferno completely obliterates the helpless target in a spectacular display of raw, unrestrained power. Staring blankly at the smoldering wreckage, Bastian finds himself completely paralyzed by the sheer, impossible magnitude of the attack. Trembling with sheer disbelief, the terrified instructor realizes Albin just effortlessly cast mixed magic that even seasoned teachers cannot activate. Smiling with mocking innocence, Albin smoothly asks the utterly dumbfounded examiner if his explosive display counts as a pass or a fail. Choking on his own furious pride, Bastian lets out a pathetic grunt of absolute frustration and undeniable defeat. Desperately scrambling to maintain his shattered control, the corrupt instructor radically alters the parameters of the entrance exam on the spot. Smirking with renewed malice, Bastian loudly declares a mock battle, promising Albin will pass if he manages to land a single hit. In a terrifying blur of absolute speed, Albin vanishes from his initial position and instantly closes the distance. Bastian lets out a pathetic shriek of pure terror as Albin suddenly materializes directly in his vulnerable blind spot. Mocking the tyrannical rule of beating a teacher before enrollment, Albin prepares to brutally strike the panicking instructor down. In a blur of sudden motion, the fierce physical clash between the two unevenly matched combatants violently intensifies. Enraged by the perceived disrespect, the furious instructor aggressively lashes out, screaming at Albin for looking down on him while proudly boasting about only using one hand. Slipping effortlessly through the frantic magical defenses, Albin vanishes from sight with a terrifying, ghost-like speed. Bastian suddenly gasps in absolute bewilderment as he completely loses track of his impossibly fast opponent. Materializing instantly in the panicked instructor's vulnerable blind spot, Albin aggressively zeroes in for the crushing counterattack. Mocking his supposedly superior teacher, Albin coldly declares that the corrupt instructor is the actual pathetic brat. With a devastating display of raw physical power, Albin effortlessly lands the decisive, bone-crushing single hit required to instantly pass the exam. Letting out a pathetic scream of pure agony, Bastian is violently launched backward by the overwhelming, concussive impact. The sheer, unstoppable force of the brutal blow viciously slams the terrified instructor straight into the unyielding stone ground. Staring coldly down at his utterly broken opponent, Albin cruelly spits that the supposedly elite teacher is disgustingly weak. Relentlessly taunting the shattered man, Albin mockingly questions if someone this hopelessly pathetic can truly be a legitimate Royal Academy teacher. Radiating absolute, terrifying dominance, the young noble fiercely glares down at the trembling, completely defeated instructor lying in the dirt. Eager to continue the one-sided massacre, Albin arrogantly demands to know if they should clash with real swords or escalate into a highly destructive magic shootout. Suddenly, a booming, highly authoritative voice loudly echoes across the ruined arena, firmly declaring that the brutal entrance exam is completely over. Ignoring the supreme command entirely, a completely battle-crazed Albin aggressively demands that his bleeding opponent entertain him even further. The panicked, heavily battered instructor pathetically cries out in desperate relief upon instantly recognizing the highly anticipated arrival of Headmaster Faust. Stroking his long beard thoughtfully, the legendary headmaster calmly evaluates the absolute, undeniable carnage unfolding directly before his very eyes. Stepping confidently onto the shattered battlefield is Faust Melchizedek, the Academy's formidable headmaster and unquestionably one of the kingdom's absolute greatest mages. Revealing that a young crayon highly recommended Albin as a terrifying once-in-a-century talent, Faust correctly identifies the cocky young baron. Still weeping pathetically on the ruined ground, the utterly broken bastion desperately pleads for his powerful superior's immediate, saving intervention. Glaring heavily down with terrifying, silent disappointment, the legendary mage sharply calls out the pathetic instructor's name in a bone-chilling tone. Desperately attempting to salvage his shattered pride, the bleeding teacher frantically demands immediate, severe punishment for Albin's ruthless assault on Academy staff. Utterly disgusted by the disgraceful display, Faust brutally fires the incompetent instructor on the absolute spot, strictly ordering him to pack his belongings and leave immediately. Completely blindsided by the shockingly harsh dismissal, a violently terrified Bastion gasps in absolute, miserable disbelief. Instantly pivoting his intense, overwhelming focus away from the trash, Faust sharply redirects his commanding attention squarely onto the victorious Albin Ordran. Cursing his miserable, unfair fate, the permanently disgraced instructor pathetically drags his battered body away from the battlefield in absolute, agonizing humiliation. Snapping smoothly back to his highly casual demeanor, Albin cheerfully asks the legendary headmaster if his spectacular victory means his official enrollment is now approved. Nodding with immense, solemn authority, Faust firmly approves the highly dangerous young noble's official enrollment into the prestigious Royal Academy. Praising the boy's incredibly surprising composure, Faust smoothly transitions into offering a single, highly critical piece of life-saving advice. In the distant background, the thoroughly crushed former instructor stumbles weakly toward the grand exit, completely and permanently banished from the elite academy grounds. Faust severely warns the highly arrogant prodigy to remember he is merely a student and must completely stop ruthlessly bullying the academy's teachers more than absolutely necessary. Sweating nervously at the razor-sharp reprimand, Albin internally resolves to dial back his overwhelming sadism in the future since Faust graciously let this highly brutal incident slide. Shifting smoothly to logistical matters, the headmaster mysteriously reveals that Albin and one other highly unique student will be housed together in a highly special, individual wing. Turning sharply away from the battered arena, the young noble confidently strides away to locate his entirely new, highly mysterious living arrangements. Suddenly utterly confused by the highly complex campus layout, Albin loudly complains that the specifically designated dormitory wing seems to be entirely in the exact opposite direction of the standard boys' quarters. Pushing open the heavy wooden door, Albin cautiously steps into his newly assigned, highly mysterious dormitory room. Entering the spacious quarters, the young noble's eyes immediately lock onto a surprisingly large, extravagant piece of furniture. Staring down in absolute bewilderment, Albin thoroughly inspects the single, massive bed dominating the center of the room. Gripped by sudden panic, the flustered groom loudly demands to know exactly who he is supposed to share this intimate space with. Just as his frustration peaks, the door creaks open and a familiar, gentle voice cheerfully announces her arrival. Stepping gracefully into the room, Letitia explains that she was abruptly relocated here under the direct instructions of the headmaster. While Letitia confirms she was guided here properly, a frantic Albin quickly points out that they are definitely not in the girls' wing. Furious at the headmaster's audacity, Albin mentally screams at the bald geezer that sharing a bed with his new wife will absolutely lead to an unexpected pregnancy before graduation. Completely overwhelmed by his racing, scandalous thoughts, the panicked noble desperately clutches his face in absolute distress. Watching his chaotic meltdown, Letitia calmly stares at her frantic husband with a soft, slightly blushing expression. A heavy, deeply awkward silence momentarily falls over the controversial shared quarters as the newlyweds process their situation. Desperately trying to maintain his composure, Albin awkwardly decides to immediately consult the headmaster about completely separating their living arrangements. Expressing genuine disappointment that they won't share the single bed, Letitia playfully agrees to set up a temporary partition instead. Completely blindsided by his bride's incredibly bold disappointment, Albin's face instantly erupts into a furious, bright red blush. Utterly flustered by her teasing, the deeply embarrassed groom loudly and frantically stammers Letitia's name in pure shock. Shifting scenes, Headmaster Faust eagerly asks his trusted colleague if he finally witnessed the terrifying, once-in-a-millennium aura radiating from Baron Albin Ordran. The high-ranking official quietly contemplates the legendary headmaster's profound observation regarding the extremely dangerous young prodigy. Sighing deeply, the official admits he initially thought Faust was crazy to support the brat but completely understands his reasoning now. Connecting the strategic dots, the official cautiously asks if this terrifying potential is exactly why Albin was deliberately placed in the same room as Lady Letitia. Faust darkly explains that while Albin is remarkably strong and noble, he harbors a merciless demon in his heart that ruthlessly tramples his enemies. The wise headmaster gravely notes that the immensely powerful Baron Ordran is undeniably built to be the absolute vessel of a tyrant. Revealing his master plan, Faust confidently declares that Letitia, possessing the vessel of a wise ruler, will become completely indispensable in guiding Albin's dark power. Smiling with deep anticipation, the headmaster happily expresses his immense excitement to watch how this legendary couple will ultimately develop. Returning his focus to their ongoing game, Faust calmly analyzes the strategic chessboard resting between the two plotting officials. Dismissing the disgraced instructor's fate, Faust happily officially surrenders the chess match while casually noting that Bastian was already corrupted by bribes anyway. The official smoothly calls checkmate while proudly reminding Faust that strict new school rules are being aggressively applied this year. Meanwhile, the recently fired and deeply humiliated Bastian angrily wanders the dark, isolated streets of the sprawling capital. Grinding his teeth in absolute fury, the disgraced instructor viciously curses every single person who ever dared to look down on him. Glaring menacingly into the gloomy shadows, Bastian's deeply shattered pride rapidly violently morphs into an uncontrollable, seething hatred. Clenching his fists in absolute rage, the vengeful man ruthlessly begins plotting his dark, inevitable retaliation against the academy. Laughing like an absolute maniac, Bastian loudly vows to violently defile absolutely everything that ruined his prestigious life. Screaming into the empty alley, he maliciously swears to utterly destroy the academy's pristine honor along with Albin Ordran himself. Suddenly, a shocking noise in the dark alley violently interrupts Bastian's unhinged rant, severely startling the disgraced instructor. Before he can even react, a swift, brutal strike savagely impacts Bastian out of nowhere. Letting out a pathetic grunt of absolute agony, the ambushed man violently collapses onto the cold, unforgiving stone pavement. Bleeding heavily on the ground, a deeply miserable Bastian pathetically curses his terrible luck, wondering why he is constantly being violently attacked. A highly mysterious, unknown voice smoothly asks if he is all right, prompting the terrified Bastian to nervously stammer a reply. Staring up in sheer, undeniable horror, the heavily bleeding instructor gasps Albin's name as he seemingly recognizes his brutal attacker.